the people from this area and you, I'm sure, who had an unusual eye on the storm that was way out in the Leeward Islands and paying attention to that because it looked like a forward cone would include Louisiana. So you're in hurricane season. Is there anxiety or what hangs in the air?
I think anxiety is absolutely in the air. There's a certain amount of PTSD out there, and I mean that literally, not figuratively. And there's just something different about this year's hurricane season. Every year, as governmental employees, you always take it seriously, and you think this could be the year. Well, last year was certainly the year for Lake Charles in southwest Louisiana. And so I would say that as governmental employees, we are preparing as if this could be it again. As citizens, we had about a decade of a break from hurricanes. Hurricane Rita in 2005 was significant. There were a couple other hurricanes with Ike and Gustav. Nothing to the nature or significance of Rita. But for about a decade, we maybe got a little complacent as citizens. Mm-hmm. And 2020 just completely reminded us that Mother Nature can be brutal at any moment in time. And I can tell you that, again, speaking more as a citizen, I'm in my late 30s. And I remember Hurricane Rita and Katrina was the same year. And I remember thinking that was going to be our benchmark for the worst disaster that I would ever go through in my life. For a generation before me, it might have been Hurricane Audrey in the late 50s. Right. You know, my grandmother, I remember stories about Hurricane Audrey and the death and destruction of that significant event. Well, I thought that Rita was going to be my generation's Hurricane Audrey, and we were wrong. What hit us last year was the worst damage that Southwest Louisiana has seen, in a century, over 100 years. You'd have to go back to the Great Fire of 1910 to find another watershed moment that was as significant for the city of Lake Charles as Hurricane Laura was last year.
Here you are in another hurricane season, so I can see the PTSD that would be out there.
Absolutely. It's scary. Every time you just turn on the news and you start watching the weathermen speak, or you are on social media and you see someone share an image of the cone, the cone of uncertainty.
Right.
It's just it's again, I try to separate sometimes the way I react to things as a citizen versus a governmental employee. But as a citizen, it is very scary, and there's a lot of emotions that now come along with hurricane season and probably will for many years.
At a year from the night Laura struck, what can you tell people nationwide where you are a year later, and what surprises you about it, what you need, just where you are, where things are happening?
That's a really big question. After a year, I will say that I would have hoped to have had more support from our federal government. And it took me a while to get there before I wanted to say that publicly, because I don't want to come across as whining, or I don't want to come across as a community that simply has their hat in their hand going to DC and saying, hey, fix this for us. We have moved heaven and earth down here locally and done everything that we can. You see neighbors helping neighbors, you see cousins helping cousins, family members who might not have known each other that well, got to know each other very well over the last year. But there is a limited amount of financial capital in Southwest Louisiana. There's a limited amount of nonprofit and faith-based organizational capital in Southwest Louisiana. And the severity of what hit us rises to a certain level and requires a certain response from the federal government. Other communities have received supplemental federal disaster aid days, weeks after one singular event. I'll go back to Hurricane Katrina. And by the way, they needed it, and I'm glad they got it. 10 days after Hurricane Katrina, Washington, D.C. acted with federal supplemental disaster aid. It happened 30 days after Hurricane Andrew, happened 90 days after Superstorm Sandy, here we sit having gone through 4 federally declared natural disasters, more than any
Right.
other city in American history. 365 days later, and we do not have a penny of supplemental disaster aid. The road home program happened after Hurricane Katrina. Over $9 billion was funneled
Right.
through HUD to help reestablish people in sustainable, healthy housing. After the 2016 Baton Rouge floods, the Restore program filtered down $650 million for the same purpose. Zero, zilch, nada, after what we've been through for a program similar to Road Home or Restore.
What are you told is the reason for that?
That's the most common question I get, is why.
I mean, I realize we're in a pandemic, which is huge.
Yeah.
Is that the reason?
I think it's a convergence of many reasons. The America has gone through a very interesting and emotional and roller coaster year and a half, with a pandemic on people's minds, with a presidential election, probably the most controversial and emotional presidential election in a generation, on our minds. And the other thing is that this certainly is no consolation to locals. But last year in 2020, other than COVID, there were not a lot of significant weather-related natural disasters dispersed geographically. There were some wildfires on the West Coast, but nothing like a Katrina or a Rita or a Laura hit anywhere along the East Coast. And so I got to tell you that, for me, while it's a very real thing, it's also really difficult to say, because what it means is in Southwest Louisiana, we don't have the bandwidth. We don't have the numbers, and there's not the political bandwidth in other places of the country.
The clout or the pull here as in some other places.
Yeah, and I'll tell you the other thing that plays into it, and this is a double-edged sword, is we are an extremely self-reliant population here. We tend to respond, and we help each other, and we reach across the aisle and across neighborhoods, and there's a lot of self-sufficiency in this community. And sometimes that does not always act as the best invitation for federal aid when it's truly needed. And again, look, I want to tell people that we are doing a lot down here. We're doing everything we can. We are not sitting on our hands.
Right.
But I am not bashful about saying it. I'm not too proud to say that there are some neighborhoods in this city that look like Hurricane Laura hit yesterday. And that's going to take more than just local government and nonprofits and churches to fix.
Nick, we're driving through town today, and I'm amazed at what's not been done. I'm surprised that just regular signs are still blown out, just convenience store signs, gas station signs, just basically that. Then you see structures that are collapsed still, and there might be one next to it that doesn't seem like it was hit that badly, but it is widespread and it's everywhere, and that surprises me. Mm-hmm. Have you seen it? I guess you haven't seen it that bad before.
Absolutely not. And after Hurricane Rita, first of all, there wasn't the amount of damage. Just to quantify the amount of debris that we have cleared out of Lake Charles, in the aftermath of Hurricane Rita, the city of Lake Charles cleared out about 1.6 million cubic yards of debris. In the past 12 months after Laura, that number for the city of Lake Charles is about 4.4 million cubic yards of debris. So we're talking about more than double the amount of damage and debris. So the scale was so much more and so much worse than Hurricane Rita. There has been a philosophical shift with insurance companies. I don't know why, and I can't tell you the legalities behind it, but I hear and I see more issues with people receiving fair settlements from their insurance companies, fair awards from their insurance companies, way more than we did after Hurricane Rita. So I think that plays into it as well. But also, after one disaster, after a Rita, after a Katrina even, it's one disaster. You're able to move on, you're able to start picking up the pieces, you're able to start putting your life back together, even if it's step by step, day by day, moment by moment. Think about trying to do that, and then 6 weeks later, Hurricane Delta comes. And then 4 months later, a winter storm. And that busts pipes in people's home, and maybe fresh sheetrock you put up last month is having to be torn out again. And then the May 17th flood, which the National Weather Service calls a 1,000-year flood event. It's like every time we start to get our heads a little above water, Mother Nature comes and just pushes us back down. So it's very intense. And when I drive around Lake Charles, I see it. And for the average citizen, it really weighs on you. It weighs on your shoulders.
And you mentioned that the insurance is the one, once in 100-year events, once in 1,000-year events. Those seem to be so much more frequent. In fact, they factually are more frequent in the past 5 years than they were in previous decades. That there are other factors coming together. I don't know if insurance is buckling under the weight of that, but they could be.
I don't know.
But that's not a reason, is it?
No, I don't know the answer to it. I know that and I'm not just talking about speaking with my friends who are attorneys. I'm talking about speaking with contractors, with just average citizens who are out there trying to get a fair settlement, and they're having difficulty getting it. Much more difficulty today than we heard about 15 years ago after Rita.
Probably the worst thing to see is your signature building in downtown Lake Charles, boarded up, no action, not in service. And what is the future for that building?
So also, just to make a comparison, and every storm has its own DNA. I mean, what happened in New Orleans with Katrina was absolutely devastating to that city. And it was a different event. It was a lot of flooding from levees breaking, and we did not have as much flooding in Lake Charles as New Orleans did with Katrina. However, the owner of that building also owned buildings in New Orleans during Katrina. And their words to me verbatim was that this building received 3 times the amount of damage that any of their buildings in New Orleans received during Katrina, because the winds were just catastrophic. I mean, we had winds that were akin to a 30-mile wide tornado coming through Lake Charles. That's what it was like. It was a Cat 4 on the edge of a Cat 5. Some people actually argue that it was a Cat 5 when it hit Lake Charles.
Right.
I mean, that's as powerful as it gets. And so, yes, that building took a lick. And at this juncture, it's public knowledge that the owners of that building are battling with their insurance company.
Right.
And the future is uncertain. But I can just tell you, as a citizen, I would love to see the building refurbished, put back into use again. But I'd rather see it torn down than see it continue to look that way for an extended period of time, because it sticks out like a pretty big sore thumb, and a pretty big reminder that Lake Charles has not, quote unquote, recovered.
Or moved on, or begun to move on even.
Right. And I don't want that stigma to be there years down the road.
Yeah, so it's a tough reminder.
It is. Well, and look, for people here in Lake Charles, every day we open the door and drive down the street, there's 1,000 tough reminders.
Wait, where does that leave you? You don't give up, but where does that leave you?
Well, certainly we never give up. Every day I get up, and I know, just like the other 80,000 Lake Charles citizens that are here, we get up and we go to work, some go to school. We're making the best of it. Lake Charles is going to be here in 10 years. I mean, City Hall will still be standing a decade from now. The real question is, to what level of resiliency will we be able to recover? And the biggest question for me is, when you get into the neighborhoods and you see the blue tarps and you see the boarded up windows and you see people sleeping on couches and sleeping in hallways because there's not enough housing here, what's that going to be like in 10 years? If the federal government does not respond with supplemental disaster aid, are we going to have neighborhoods in 10 years that look like Hurricane Laura hit them just yesterday. Because I can tell you right now, the amount of money it would cost to go and mitigate the damaged structures that are out there. The city of Lake Charles could not bear the brunt of that on our own. The state of Louisiana has calculated the unmet housing need, unmet now. So after insurance, after FEMA, the unmet housing needed over $900 million from Laura, Delta, and Zeta. And that is before the winter storm and the May 17th floods. So where do we go from here is we continue to advocate for additional resources. We will scrape every penny from the couch cushions we can find, and we're getting creative on some programs and initiatives through FEMA and some other programs that we're working on right now. And we're going to be here. Lake Charles is going to be here. We are going to move forward. And it's really difficult because I want to be that optimistic cheerleader for my city. I want to say, hey, man, we're going to get through this and everything's going to be fine and we're all going to be having apple pie and ice cream and staring at rainbows in 3 or 4 years. But I'm also a realist, and I know what it took for New Orleans to recover. And I know the amount of money that was pumped into that city for it to be where it is today, and still on the road to recovery in New Orleans. You can drive around and still see some remnants of Katrina.
Yeah.
And then I look at my city, and it's like crickets out of Washington, D.C. when we're asking for the same type of response that other cities have gotten dozens of occasions over the last 30 years. And I'm left feeling really disheartened and pretty downtrodden because we haven't gotten that type of response or attention or interest.
We've talked many times during the course of the year, and now with the 1-year anniversary, this is it's sort of a new awareness that, hey, we have not gotten the help we need. And we still need it.
Yeah.
And it's got to come.
Absolutely. And look, I always try to choose words that are going to help people. There's been a lot of emotional times over the last year where I really wanted to just lash out and say something because it would have made me feel good to say it. And I'm going to continue to choose my words diplomatically and carefully because I want to help people. But there's a lot of people in Louisiana and a lot of people in Washington, D.C. that could be doing a lot more right now. And shame on them if they have the ability to do more and for whatever reason they're not. Politics, the evil nature of politics has inserted itself into this process to try and get supplemental disaster aid. Polarization and the political temperature of this country has affected our cause. And that's really disappointing because I guarantee you the person that needs help doesn't care whether it's a Republican or a Democrat that provides it. Right. They need help. And we're talking about helping low to moderate income people. We're talking about helping the most vulnerable in our community, who were the most vulnerable before the storm, many of whom felt marginalized before the storm, and now triple that feeling, right. Quadruple that feeling, quadruple that vulnerability after the storms. And anyone that looks at this, and any elected official that looks at this situation and doesn't give it their all and put politics aside and say, these people need help, let's go help them. I don't understand that. I don't know how that can be a human reaction to what we see day to day here in Lake Charles.
What do you leave us with?
Well, I leave you with thank you.
Just this moment, because we'll be back.
Yeah. First, and no, I mean that seriously. Thank you for being concerned about Lake Charles. Every opportunity, every interview that I speak with, I tell them, thank you for being here. Thank you for keeping our story alive. The worst thing that can happen is people stop talking about what's happening in Lake Charles and people forget and they move on to the next natural disaster. There's going to be more. There already have been more. but I ask people to be advocates for us. It's painfully obvious that our voices alone here in Southwest Louisiana haven't produced the results that we need. So I ask people watching this throughout the state of Louisiana, throughout the Gulf Coast, wherever they may be, to look at what happened to Lake Charles and first of all realize that we're humans, we're Americans, we're your brothers and sisters, and we need help. And also, it could happen to you next year.
Right.
I mean, there are millions of Americans, thousands of communities, cities, towns who live as close to the Gulf of Mexico or closer, or as close to the ocean or closer than does Lake Charles and our citizenry. So we had a string of unprecedented and historic natural disasters hit us over the last year. It could happen to another community next year. And I pray that no one has to go through what we went through, but if they do, my second prayer would be that they had a hell of a lot better response from the federal government than what we have had. And again, I try to be very ecumenical in my commentary. President Trump and the 116th Congress had a chance to act. They did not. Now President Biden and the 117th Congress has a chance to act, and I pray that they do.